Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. It's my pleasure now to begin our reading and discussion, or rather continue our reading and discussion of the book Codeword Barbelon by P.D. Stewart. Yesterday we were talking about the official statements of the various Protestant churches from official sources declaiming Sunday as the Sabbath, simply and plainly saying there is no scriptural warrant anywhere in the Bible for a change of the Sabbath from the seventh day to Sunday. We quoted from the American Congregationalist Church, the Anglican Church, the Baptists, the Brethren, and from the Church of Christ. And that's only a partial list. This morning we'll continue with official quotations from authoritative sources in the Congregational Church, the Christian Church, the Disciples of Christ, the Episcopalian, the Lutheran Free Church, the Methodist, Moody Bible Institute, and on. We'll begin with the Congregationalists. Their official statement is, quote, "The current notion that Christ and his apostles authoritatively substituted the first day of the first day for the seventh is absolutely without any authority in the New Testament." That from Dr. Lyman Abbott. It was published in the Christian Union, dated January 18th, 1882. Now an official statement from the Christian Church. Quote, "I do not believe that the Lord's Day came in the room of the Jewish Sabbath, or that the Sabbath was changed from the seventh to the first day, for this plain reason: where there is no testimony, there can be no faith. Now, there is no testimony in all the oracles of heaven that the Sabbath is changed, or that the Lord's Day came in the room of it." Unquote. From Alexander Campbell, published in The Reporter, October 8th, 1921. Here, the official statement from an authority in the Disciples of Christ Church. Quote, "If it," speaking of the Ten Commandments, "yet exists, let us observe it. And if it does not exist, let us abandon a mock observance of another day for it. But, some say, it has changed from the seventh to the first day. Where? When? And by whom? No, it was never changed, nor could it be, unless creation was to be gone through again. For the reason assigned in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3 must be changed before the observance or the respect to the reason can be changed. It is all old wives' fables to talk of the change of the Sabbath from the seventh to the first day. If it be changed, it was that august personage changed it, who changes times and laws ex officio. I think his name is Dr. Antichrist." Unquote. From Alexander Campbell, published in the Christian Baptist, February 2nd, 1824, Volume 1, Number 7. And now the Episcopalians. Quote, "We have made the change from the seventh day to the first day, from Saturday to Sunday, on the authority of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church of Christ." Unquote. From the Episcopalian, Bishop George F. Seymour, in the article entitled "Why We Keep Sunday," blatantly admits that the Roman Catholic Church was the authority that they follow in observance of Sunday. Now the Lutherans. Quote, "The observance of the Lord's Day, that is Sunday, is founded not on any command of God, but on the authority of the Church." Unquote. That from the Augsburg Confession of Faith, July 8, 1530, the first Protestant confession of faith drawn up by Melanchthon. Another quote, They, speaking of the Catholics, allege the Sabbath changed into Sunday, the Lord's Day, contrary to the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, as it appears. Neither is there any example more boasted of than the changing of the Sabbath day. Great, say they, is the power and authority of the Church, since it dispensed with one of the Ten Commandments. Unquote. From the Augsburg Confession, Article 28, Paragraph 9. And the author gives us a note. The above statement by the Lutheran is recorded in Philip Schaff's Creeds of Christendom, Volume 4th edition, Volume 3, page 64. This statement was made by the Lutherans and written by Melanchthon only 13 years after Luther nailed his theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church and began the Protestant Reformation. The Lutherans knew that Sunday was observed by sanction of the Roman Catholic Church. There was no scriptural authority for it. Now, the Lutheran Free Church weighs in. Quote, For when there could not be produced one solitary place in the Holy Scriptures which testified that either the Lord himself or the apostles had ordered such a transfer of the Sabbath to Sunday, then it was not easy to answer the question, who has transferred the Sabbath and who has the right to do it? Unquote. From George Sverdrup in the book A New Day. The Methodists, quote, This handwriting of ordinances our Lord did blot out, take away, and nail to the cross. Colossians chapter 2, verse 14. But the moral law contained in the Ten Commandments and enforced by the prophets, he did not take away. The moral law stands on an entirely different foundation from the ceremonial or ritual law. Every part of this law must remain in force upon all mankind and in all ages. Unquote. From John Wesley, in his Sermons on Several Occasions, 2 volumes, edition, volume 1, pages 221 and 222. Another quote, The Sabbath instituted in the beginning and confirmed again and again by Moses and the prophets has never been abrogated. A part of the moral law, not a jot or a tittle of its sanctity has been taken away. From the New York Herald, published 1874 on the Methodist Episcopal Bishop's Pastoral of that same year. Now from the Moody Bible Institute, quote, The Sabbath was binding in Eden, and it has been in force ever since. This 4th commandment begins with the word remember, showing that the Sabbath already existed when God wrote the law on the tables of stone at Sinai. How can men claim that this one commandment has been done away with when they will admit that the other 9 are still binding? Unquote. From D.L. Moody, in his book, Weighed and Wanting, Address on the Ten Commandments, published in Chicago by the BICA in 1898, page 47. Another quote from Moody Bible Institute, quote, I honestly believe that this commandment, that is the 4th or the Sabbath commandment, is just as binding today as it ever was. I have talked with men who have said that it has been abrogated, but they have never been able to point to any place in the Bible where God repealed it. Unquote. From Dr. D.L. Moody, page 46 of the same work. Again, Dr. D.L. Moody says, this 4th is not a commandment for one place or one time, but for all places and times. Again, Dr. D.L. Moody at San Francisco, January 1st, 1881. The Presbyterians are weighing in now on the Sabbath. Quote, The Christian Sabbath, that is Sunday, is not in the Scriptures, and was not by the primitive church called the Sabbath. Unquote. From Dwight's Theology, volume 14, page 401. Another quote from the Presbyterians, quote, A further argument for the perpetuity of the Sabbath we have in Matthew 24, verse 20. Pray ye that your flight be not in winter, neither on the Sabbath day. But the final destruction of Jerusalem was after the Christian dispensation was fully set up in 70 A.D. Yet it is plainly implied in these words of the Lord that even when Christians were bound to strict observation of the Sabbath. Unquote. This from the works of Jonathan Edwards, a Presbyterian, Volume 4, page 621. Now, the Protestant Episcopal Church, quote, the day is now changed from the seventh to the first day, but as we meet with no scriptural direction for the change, we may conclude it was done by the authority of the church, unquote, from the work entitled Explanation of Catechism. Now the Southern Baptists, quote, the sacred name of the seventh day is Sabbath. This fact is too clear to require argument. Exodus chapter 20, verse 10 is then quoted, the very Sabbath commandment, and it continues. It says, on this point, the plain teaching of the word has been admitted in all ages. Not once did the disciples apply the Sabbath law to the first day of the week. That folly was left for a later age, nor did they pretend that the first day supplanted the seventh, unquote. That from Joseph Hudson Taylor in the Sabbatic Question, published in 1914, pages 14 through 17 and 41. Another quote from the Southern Baptists, quote, the Sabbath was established originally, that is, long before Moses, in no special connection with the Hebrews, but as an institution for all mankind. It was designed for all the descendants of Adam, unquote. That from the Adult Quarterly of the Southern Baptist Convention series, August 15, 1937. And this is one of the most regular arguments when the subject of the Sabbath comes up on amateur radio, that it was just for the Jews. But they conveniently forget that the Sabbath was instituted in the Garden of Eden, and it was given to man, not the Jews. So, reader, what can we make of these unequivocal admissions? By the Protestant churches, I will add. The above confession from the leading denominations unitedly, wholly, and with one voice testify that it was the church in apostasy that tampered with the holy Sabbath, as was prophesied by the great prophet Daniel, quote, he shall think to change times and laws. Daniel chapter 7, verse 2. Thus we see that despite all the ingenious and imaginative attempts by the likes of Paul K. Jewett, Dale Ratzlaff, Mosna, and others, their bald assertions concerning the change of the Sabbath from the seventh day to Sunday are mere opinions, or worse yet, are bold-faced and dishonest assertions. The irrefutable testimony of their church leaders and their official church documents, not to mention all the reputable historians, utterly refute these sophists. So try again, gentlemen. Mosna, Jewett, Ratzlaff, your efforts have hardly passed. As one author observed, these men act as though they had been given special liberty to cancel the decisions of God. The higher critics put themselves in the place of God and review the Word of God, revising or endorsing it. In this way, all nations are induced to drink the wine of the fornication of Babylon. These higher critics have fixed things to suit the popular heresies of these last days. If they cannot subvert and misapply the Word of God, if they cannot bend it to human practices, they break it, unquote. Isaiah says that the Sabbath will be kept in the earth made new. Quote, From one Sabbath to another shall all flesh come to worship before the Lord. Isaiah chapter 66, verse 23. Surely, not even Ratzlaff or Jewett will be so impudent as to suggest that Isaiah, writing in the Old Testament and having known only the seventh-day Sabbath, was thinking of Sunday. Incidentally, it is said, and the author admits he has no particular proof of this, but that the great Billy Graham acknowledged the seventh-day Sabbath as still binding, but stated, quote, "If I were to teach this truth, I would lose most of my listeners," unquote. And I can sorely relate to that. Now, chapter 70 of the book, Codeword Barbelon, is entitled The Roman Catholic Hierarchy, What They Say They Would Do If They Could. At the top of page 510, if you're following along, it begins with a quote from Time magazine. Cardinal Strict of Chicago, he says, "It no longer can be said today that the United States is a Protestant country." Yes, that was in Time magazine. Cardinal Strict of Chicago, August 5th, 1955. The author begins by saying, if any suppose that Romanism, as a creed, has changed its intolerant character, then let that person read what it is said in this chapter. I shall now reveal to you the full cloven foot of Antichrist. To those who would accuse me of poisoning the minds of the people against Roman Catholicism, I have to say that I fully agree with you. The exposing of Roman Catholicism, as has been herein effected, is indeed not the best advertisement to the world of her teachings, laws, dogmas, or character. But as George Rutledge once said, quote, "There are times when it is necessary to show the public even the worst side of life," unquote. Now, in citing my sources on the following pages, I have tried to use mainly Catholic authors, so that, to borrow from the eloquent lines of John Donne, quote, "I have a safe defense against any quarreler," unquote. And in whatsoever place I cite from a Catholic author, if I have not considered the book itself, in most instances, I cite him from another Catholic writer or one who was acquainted with such author, so that, as I have already said, I shall hardly be condemned of any false citation, or of bigotry or hate speech, except to make me an accessory to the very Roman Catholic authors whose pronouncement I quote. My point really is quite simple. If it is wrong for me to quote from their Catholic books and statements, then it is wrong for them to have written them. But of course, the tyrant of ages would not have us recall her dark deeds. And so the Papists and even Protestants, would you believe it, tell us, quote, "You must move on," unquote. But has Rome changed? With that somewhat humorous observation, and thank God for a sense of humor, I now produce an exhibit for your deliberations, the proof you would demand of me if we were in a court of law. Let us now span the last 200 to 300 years to the present day to see what Rome's true sentiments are concerning civil liberties, her unchangeable position. We start with Pope Pius IX in his syllabus of December 8th, 1864, where he said, quote, "The absurd and erroneous doctrines or ravings in defense of liberty of conscience are a most pestilential error, a pest of all others most to be dreaded in a state," unquote. The Rambler, once the organ of Cardinal Wiseman in London, says, quote, "Religious liberty, in the sense of a liberty possessed by every man to choose his religion, is one of the most wicked delusions ever foisted upon this age by the father of all deceit. The very name liberty, except in the sense of a permission to do certain definite acts, ought to be banished. No man has a right to choose his religion. None but an atheist can uphold the principles of religious liberty. Shall I foster that damnable doctrine, that Socinianism and Calvinism and Anglicanism and Judaism are not every one of them mortal sins like murder and adultery? Shall I hold out hopes to my erring Protestant brother that I will not meddle with his creed if he will not meddle with mine? Shall I tempt him to forget that he has no more right to his religious views than he has to my purse or to my house or to my life's blood? Absurd? There is more. Next, we notice to Bishop O'Connor of Pittsburgh, USA, who revealed to us that, quote, religious liberty is merely endured until the opposite can be carried into effect without peril to the Catholic Church, unquote. Father Hector, founder of the Paulist Fathers, an order that achieved prominence in the United States, of which Hector was the superior, made a declaration that would startle the thoughtful reader. Quote, before long, there is to be a state religion in the country, and that state religion is to be Roman Catholic, unquote. That was published in the Catholic World, Volume 13, page 694. This language from these leading Roman Catholics is plain enough, unequivocal, uncompromising, and cannot be misinterpreted. No wonder General Lafayette warned of these men, quote, if the liberties of the American people are ever destroyed, they will fall by the hands of the Roman Catholic clergy, unquote. Now, a plainer view yet of Rome's master plan. Here again is yet another frightful malediction from the Romish Antichrist, which is too good to pass over. The Brownson Review declares, quote, democracy is a mischievous dream where the Roman Catholic Church does not predominate, unquote. This review, edited by Dr. August Brownson, was the acknowledged organ of Archbishop Hughes, the then head of all the Roman Catholic churches in North America. Nay more, Brownson's review is the accredited organ of Romanism in the United States and perhaps the most authentic organ of Catholicism in that great country. The editor ostentatiously paraded the names of the archbishops and bishops on the cover of his review to give it the stamp of authority and asserts, quote, I never think of publishing anything in regard to the Church of Rome without submitting my articles to the bishop for inspection, approval, and endorsement, unquote. The same Dr. Brownson, a convert, nay, a pervert to Roman Catholicism, also declares, without reserve or shame, and with the endorsement of the bishop, that, quote, what the Church has done, what she has expressly or tacitly approved in the past, that is exactly what she will do, expressly or tacitly approve in the future, if the same circumstances occur. Let me also call your attention to the following writings and statements expressed by the highest Roman Catholic authorities, and these will blow your mind. Some quotes from the Catholic Church. Quote, there is one and only one sure democracy, the Catholicism of the popes, unquote. That from the Catholic World, October 1939. Here's another one. The old Protestant culture is about at the end of its rope. Why can't we make the United States Catholic in legislation, Catholic in justice, aims, and ideals, unquote. From Father F.X. Talbot, the editor of the periodical named America, at the time was the official Jesuit magazine of the United States. That quote is also cited in the New York Globe, December 14th, 1930. Here's another quote. If Catholics ever gain sufficient numerical majority in this country, religious freedom is at an end. So our enemies say, so we believe. Unquote. Does this give you any idea why our government is so loath to close the border with the hordes and hordes of Mexican Roman Catholics coming across the border? Anyway, this was produced in the Shepherd of the Valley, a journal of the late bishops of St. Louis. C2 Confusion, Twice Confounded. Also, The Catholic World by Paulist Fathers, Volume 13, the April-September edition, 1871, copiously quoted this statement by the Roman Catholic Church. Here's another one. The Catholic Church in this nation must live on to accomplish her work, even though our Republican form of government disappears. Unquote. Again, from the Catholic World, April 1935, page 12. Here's another one. They, speaking of the Catholics, must penetrate wherever possible in the administration of civil affairs. All Catholics should do all in their power to cause the constitution of states and legislation to be modeled on the principles of the true church. Unquote. From an encyclical of Pope Leo XIII, and we've quoted that before in the book. Another quote. Constitutions can be changed, and non-Catholic sects may decline to such a point that the political proscription of them may become feasible and expedient. What protection would they have against a Catholic state? Unquote. From Morehouse Miller and John A. Ryan in The State and the Church, published in 1922, pages 38 and 39, and this received the imprimatur of Cardinal Hayes. And what about that papal bull issued by Pope Paul V, Insana Domini, which purported to exempt all Roman Catholic Church authorities from any civil prosecution and threatened excommunication to the civil magistrates and judges who dared to allow legal action against them without sanction from the Holy See. Thus, it is fair to propose that any Roman Catholic who says he or she is bound by the tenets quoted above, which are in direct, deadly conflict with our democratic and social societies, such a Roman Catholic cannot be a lawful occupant of any government office he or she may occupy, be it that of the president or a policeman or a justice of the Supreme Court. Unquote, says Rutledge, and rightly so. Yet in the full light of all this evidence, Roman Catholics tell us again and again that their church is the champion of civil liberties. We ask, therefore, has the Church of Rome renounced any of these malignant, hateful teachings? Has she confessed that these are claims and statements and sentiments which she and her leading priests ought never to have made, and which she would not now make were she in the same circumstances? No. Placed in the circumstances of power which she had before, Rome would arrogate the same prerogatives of disposing of rulers, leaders, and nations, and of inquiring into the very consciences of men. And if she could, she would bring democracy to an abrupt end. The proof? The canon law of the Roman Catholic Church. Even to this very day, these canons savagely vent maledictions upon freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, of the press. To regain her temporal power, she would at once recommence her career of persecution and reopen the books of the dreaded Inquisition, that old enginery of the Papacy. It may be hard for the reader to conceive, but this will happen again. Read once more the words of Cardinal Bishop O'Connor of Pittsburgh, quoted earlier, quote, "Religious liberty is merely endured until the opposite can be carried into effect without peril to the Roman Catholic world," unquote. This language is plain enough. No rights of Protestants, or anybody else for that matter, except Roman Catholics. What an excellent doctrine for the next world political authority, or the new Catholic Republic of America. When the Pope gives the signal to carry out the above direction, it will be enforced by the faithful in the United States of America and elsewhere as soon as the power to do so is acquired. The Catholic Bishop of St. Louis, also quoted earlier, confirms, quote, "Catholicity will one day rule America, and then religious liberty is at an end," unquote. We do not doubt it, dear Bishop. I could quote many more similar declarations, as can be found in a little pamphlet called Familiar Letters to John B. Fitzpatrick, the Catholic Bishop of Boston, by an independent Irishman. For good measure, though, here are a few more firebrands from Rome. Quote, "Effectual plans are in operation to give us the complete victory over Protestantism," unquote, says the former Bishop of Cincinnati. Quote, "Liberty of conscience," said Pope Pius IX, fulminating against our Protestant freedoms, "is a most pestilential error. From it springs revolution, corruption, contempt of sacred things, holy institutions and laws, and in one word, that pest of others most to be dreaded in a state, unbridled liberty of opinion," unquote. Yes, that was Pope Pius IX. Wonderful fellow, wasn't he? Here's another quote. "Many non-Catholics fear us as a political organization and are afraid that the Catholic Church will dominate and rule. We are working quietly, seriously, and I may say effectively to that end," unquote. Another bishop forecasted, quote, "Notwithstanding the government of the United States has thought fit to adopt a complete indifference towards all religions, yet the time has come when the Catholics will have the ascendancy," unquote. These princes of the papacy these princes of the papacy very frankly declare that they only allow us liberty of conscience where they are powerless to do otherwise. As Watson said, quote, "Papa would burn heretics right now if he could," unquote. Archbishop James E. Quigley, who remained faithful to the Church, revealed, quote, "We have well-ordered and efficient organizations at the very beck and nod of the hierarchy and ready to do what the Church authorities tell them to do. With these bodies of loyal Catholics ready to step in the breach at any time and present an unbroken front to the enemy, we may feel secure," unquote. Let me cite from another of their books I've dug up, one of the most carefully written, by our friend Dr. Brownson, said to be a gentleman of high endowments and an appointee of a professorship at the Catholic University, says, quote, "If the Church should direct the Catholic citizens of this American Republic to abolish the Constitution, the liberty, and the very existence of their country as a sovereign state, they are bound by a divine ordinance to obey," unquote. There, the Orthodox Roman Catholic position, at deadly war with any republic. I could cite many such monuments of an enlightened piety. The effrontery of these brazen statements, and to put them in writing, is too much to comprehend, but we are glad for it nevertheless. Indeed, we say, as did John Philip Newman in his sermon, quote, "Thanks, Reverend Fathers. Thanks to the plotting Jesuits. Thanks to the Sovereign Pontiff. Your language has the virtue of frankness, and we are bound to receive your statements so clearly and boldly made." Unquote. Blush, Rome, and correct yourself. But Rome feels no shame. When confronted with her crimes and her incredulities, Rome merely blushes, straightens out her frock, wipes her flushed lips, and continues on. With all the strength presented in the above facts, do we not have good cause to fear the ascendancy of Roman Catholicism in America? Thus, when the Pope and the priest tell us that Roman Catholicism is in favor of the very things which are so boldly condemned in its books, what can be the object, if not to lull and to deceive us? We only have to dig a little around their churches to find the truth. So, Americans, you have read how these priests have ignobly vented their spleens against our laws, your Constitution, your religion, and your liberty. Why do you still harbor them and give them reverence? In these fulminations, the perfidies of the Romish elements are clearly revealed. What more proof do you need to see that Roman Catholicism is a standing peril to all the principles of a republican government? And here next is a cartoon caricature of the Supreme Court bench. 9 justices in cartoonish array, seated behind a bench, 5 of whom are wearing bishops' mitres. And obviously this cartoon was drawn before the 6th papist was elected to the Supreme Court. The caption says, "A Supreme Court without Protestants?" The headline in a CNN article by Dan Gilgoff, dated May 3rd, 2010, quote, "For most of American history, a Supreme Court with no Protestant Christian judges would have been unthinkable. But since John Paul Stevens announced his retirement last month, scholars have begun entertaining the unprecedented prospect of a Supreme Court without a single Protestant. Obama's first Supreme Court appointee, Sonia Sotomayor, is Roman Catholic," unquote. In 1955, Monsignor Joseph H. Brady decried the United States Supreme Court's decision regarding separation of church and state. He predicted, quote, "A sound view of the Constitution in its relation to religion awaits change in personnel in our highest tribunal," unquote. That was in the Register, January 23rd, 1955. He's got it, says the author. And now we have 6 Roman Catholics on the Supreme Court, 3 Jews, and not a Protestant in the mix. Wake up, America. Rome not only makes your laws, she also interprets them. Remember, the Supreme Court is the one assigned to interpret the Constitution. Rome has her agents in Washington, in the state legislatures, on the benches of the lower courts, and of the Supreme Court of America. 6 of the 9 chief justices on the Supreme Court are Roman Catholic. It was none other than Prime Minister Gladstone Williams who said, quote, "No more cunning plot was ever devised against the intelligence, the freedom, the happiness, and virtue of mankind than Romanism," unquote. But yet, how few Americans are able to see the sly hand of Rome and the far-seeing purposes of her Jesuits, who, like moles, hidden deep within an organization, are quietly, covertly, working to take control of the laws and policies of America without causing as much as a ripple. chapter 71 is entitled, A Deadly Serpent That Must Be Chopped Up from End to End. Begins with a quote from John Loeffler, "Your failure to be informed does not make me a wacko." The author begins, "Whatever the Pope and his skillful spokesmen may say about human rights and social justice, we must never forget the real character of the power with which they have to do. A power which, while speaking of human rights and the dignity of all mankind, has reaffirmed that it will, if necessary, and when safe to do so, commit the same vulgar villainies of yesteryear. Do not doubt that the threats from our Catholic friends will be carried out. The quote-unquote Holy Father and his satellites are in earnest in the launching of their poisoned shafts of bitter hatred against our system of popular democracy. Quote, the canon law of the Roman Church savagely denounces separation of church and state, just as it vents maledictions upon freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom of worship and of political action, unquote. Quoting further, our laws and political freedoms are characterized as filthy, vicious, diabolical, godless, scandalous, pestilential, a social plague, breeders of unrestrained immorality, unquote. Persecution of non-Catholics in Catholic-controlled countries, says Harris, quote, should warn Americans as to what will happen if the Pope ever gains full control in this country. Rome never changes, unquote. Quoting more, Catholics are still governed with absolute rigor by their clergy. They are, in the main, united into one compact body with complete corporate unity of action and ruled despotically by their bishops, archbishops, and the Pope. The Catholic worshiper is not to think, but to believe and obey. The priest, not to reason and consider, but to proclaim and command. The voter is not to inquire or examine, but to deposit his ballot as the ecclesiastical authority directs. And the Jesuits are the most subtle enemies of humanity, who come in abundance. Some are known, others stealthily prowl about the land, all the more dangerous for their disguise, unquote. But the Jesuits and their sidekicks, the Knights of Columbus, will, of course, deny that the Catholic power in America is a foreign hierarchy and an anti-republican. For, say the Jesuits, tongue-in-cheek, of course, quote, Catholic is universal, and what is universal is never and nowhere a foreigner, unquote. But we say to them, and with all seriousness, because your Supreme Pontiff does not reside personally in America, and his power does not emanate from the American people, whether they be Protestant, Jews, or infidels, or Catholics, your hierarchy is indeed a foreign power, and most anti-republican, too. And we have the observation of Prime Minister William Gladstone, quote, the aim and tendency of Romanism, as declared in its open confessions and carried out in its policies, is to subjugate the individual to Rome, and to further Rome's assumed rights of defining the laws and rights of each country. In a word, to quote from the same author, quote, individual servitude, however abject, will not satisfy the Latin Church. The state must also be a slave, unquote. There is the woman riding the beast, just described, the church ruling the state, and the state ruling the people at the behest of the Pope, making slaves of all of us and burning those who dissent. Roman Catholicism, reader, is Caesarism, Byzantine Caesarism, or better yet, Caesaropapism, the excessive meddling of the papacy in secular affairs, which in the words of Morris Kaufman is, quote, a stiff and unbending bureaucracy spreading its ramifications all over the country and endeavoring with painful exactitude and mechanical punctuality to regulate the movements of society all over the realm, unquote. Today, the much talked about war on terror and the asserted need for legal power to spy on us, wiretap us, and to strip search us at the airport are but a few of Rome's painful exactitudes, quote unquote. No, reader, the Roman supremacy in government life did not disappear with Byzantium or even with the capture of the Pope by General Berthier. It survived and then revived through the union of socialism with papal ingenuity. To quote Samuel F.B. Morse, this is the tyranny that hopes to escape detection by assuming the name and adopting the language of democracy. Intelligent Americans, your forefathers knew well what Romanism was. They knew her record of reeking with crime and fraud, its enmity to popular rights, its foul partnerships with tyrannical kings, its frightful atrocities of persecution, its devouring greed, and its corrupting influence upon nations were but too well known. The convents which had become brothels, the shameless sale of licenses to commit sin, the peddling of indulgences which remitted sin, the massacres encouraged by the Roman Catholic Church, the ghastly and wholesale murders of the Inquisition, the broods of bastards that clung around the knees of cardinals and popes, the monstrous impositions of purgatory, rosaries, icons and such, and hypocrisies by which the priest preyed upon the masses while holding them down in the densest ignorance. These had excited a profound indignation in the men who framed our government. Everything that the fathers could do to save you from the insidious encroachments of priestcraft was done, unquote. But, to quote Watson again, today we have members of our highest lawmaking body who consider it an honor to be allowed to kiss the foot of a man. Already we have members of the United States Supreme Court and members of the cabinets who would feel incredibly elated at being given a Vatican audience in which they would humbly kneel before a man and touch his slipper with their devout lips. Already we have millions of people in America to whom the privilege of abasing themselves in the presence of a venerable Italian priest is an unattainable blessing of which they can only dream, while they from a distance adore, unquote. But reader, who says these things today? Who sounds the voice of warning? The press? No. The press will not apprise you of the dangers that threaten you. The guardians of the press, said Professor Samuel Morse, are either blinded or asleep or bribed or afraid. At any rate, it is silent on this subject, and thus is throwing the weight of its influence on the side of your enemies, unquote. Continued Morse, quote, foreign spies have clothed themselves in a religious dress, and so awestruck are our journalists at its sacred texture, and so unable or unwilling to discern the difference between the man and his mask, that they start away in fear, lest they should be called bigoted or intolerant or persecuting, if they should venture to lift up the consecrated cloak that hides a foreign foe. Americans, if you depend on your daily press, you rely on a broken reed. It fails you in your need. It dare not attack popery. It dare not drag into the light of day the political enemies of your liberty, because they come in the name of religion. We'll conclude tomorrow, or rather Monday, on Inquisition Update. Thanks for listening.